Hey everyone, welcome to Sunday Nights with Faye Seidler. It's Sunday night, it's Faye, we're doing the show. I have an exciting interview tonight with John David Berdahl talking about neurodivergency and all the ways that it comes. But for tonight, let's get into what I'm going to talk about tonight. We have the Parachico monthly events. So Parachico is a art initiative in the downtown Fargo area that is a third space and just does a lot of incredible stuff. They have a whole month of events for you to get invested and get involved. Check them out, they are wonderful. In terms of events, we also have First Link, which will have 3 what happens when you call 988, a lifeline and crisis line, on 3 different months. So we have one on January 15th, February 13th, and March 25th. Those are all ways for people to get an understanding of what happens when you call 988. You can be a professional, you can be just a person living your life, but it can be scary to know what happens if you're in a crisis when you call that number. These trainings help give you an idea of exactly what that's going to look like so you can feel more comfortable calling yourself. For 988 services, it doesn't just have to be for yourself. You can call them if you're worried about a loved one being in danger too. So keep that in mind, and there's good training opportunities for both professionals and individuals. I want to let everyone know there is a James Lowe Memorial Scholarship Fund in Minot area. They're looking to raise $10,000 to create a scholarship fund. There are a lot of details in there. I'm not going to get into them, but basically if you'd like to donate to that, they're specifically trying to help our LG plus individuals in the Minot area access higher education. If you are interested, if you'd like to donate to that, I can get you more details, but I just want to give you a heads up that it's a thing. And then finally, I want to go over a couple of newsletters that we have in our state that I think are particularly good. The first is our League of Women Voters newsletter, which covers a lot of different things about politics and policy and news and democracy and getting empowered. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. The other one is our FM Coalition to End Homeless newsletter, which is also just really good check-ins about the work they're doing in the Fargo-Moorhead area that you can kind of translate to good work that could be done all across our state. And then finally, the Red River Child Advocacy Center has a really good newsletter as well. These are things you can join if you care about these causes. If there are causes you care about, there's probably an organization doing a newsletter, and if they're not, they should. Newsletters are cool. That's what I have for our just kind of things to highlight. Getting into more of the brass tacks for our politics news, I just want to shout out me. Indy Pulse is a nightly show that I have going on. It'll be going on until the end of session. Each time I do it, each night, I'll be talking about important stuff happening. Session officially starts tomorrow, or Tuesday, January 7th, but we will be hearing bills as early as next week. We might be voting on them as early as next week too. Not sure on that, but at the very least, the week after, we'll probably see some bills make it through. So I'll be covering everything that's important and value aligned with the work I do, so suicide prevention and helping people out. You can check me out on YouTube. That show will be exclusive to YouTube, whereas the show is on Facebook and YouTube for people who are older. In equity news, I want to cover a couple things. The Washington Post, there is an article that Aaron in the Morning talked about that reviewed the Washington Post, and largely it's biased coverage of trans care that tends to be very inaccurate, which is similar to the New York Times posting a lot of pieces that are not medically sound. A lot of times people think about these publications as maybe being on the left or the right. However, there isn't a political bias to trans care. It's something that we work on in the realm of medicine. So it's much more important to listen to what our medical doctors and organizations are saying than publications. I think a lot of people think that it's a left issue to be trans accepting or accepting a trans medicine. It's just a science issue, a doctor issue. So keep in mind that there isn't a political bent that way. I think sometimes you have people who are on, let's say, the right who will see publications they see on the left as covering trans issues as negative, and they think, oh, well, this actually is a terrible issue. But it turns out people are just not informed that well on trans medicine. So just kind of covering that, there's a good synopsis on that. A lot of publications in particular have been not great at this, as journalists aren't doctors and they often represent the bias of their own communities and upbringings, even if the pieces they attempt to be neutral in, they can't avoid it, especially if they default to both sidism with a lot of the reporting that does happen. In other news, Moorhead Starbucks workers have joined a strike for the national Starbucks strike. Interestingly enough, the article does talk about trans care being taken off of Starbucks insurance. I don't know how that's going to work in states like Minnesota that actually legally protect trans care. I think even with public insurance plans. So I'm not really sure. It's interesting that that's mentioned. Starbucks did mention trying to remove care because of the unionization, but it seems like they just did it anyway. So I guess the union really does help and really does matter, because without it, there would be no recourse to stuff like this. There's a really good article talking about YouthWorks and the amazing work that they do to keep our youth safe, in particular these cold months. I just want you to know about that and to check it out, because YouthWorks really does save lives in so many ways, and not just saves lives directly, but just indirectly the ways that they can mitigate trauma, help people thrive across their entire life, not just in acute instances where they are experiencing harm. So that's an article to check out. Their organization's amazing. I also want to shout out the Fargo City Commission. They have publicly stated within one of their meetings 2-3 weeks ago that they're going to take a step back from trying to fix the issues impacting homelessness in our area, or rather work collaboratively with our experts. That's all I've actually been asking for. I've been highly critical of some of the city commissioners for not doing that, and I want to appreciate that that's the direction that they're heading in now. I like to thank people for doing what I think is a good job, as well as being critical when I think maybe they aren't quite hitting the mark. So I just want to say that's amazing that they're doing it. I think people check in with and appreciate the people who are doing the work that you like. And maybe you don't, and you can still yell at them. Maybe you do, you should praise them. But make sure that you're not just criticizing everyone. Make sure you have room to appreciate people too. I greatly appreciate that our Fargo City Commission is letting our experts lead this conversation, because they're the ones who know what's up and what to do. I want to highlight an article talking about occupational cancer for firefighters. I haven't looked into it. I'm sure it's bad. I don't know if this is the soundest science in the world, but I'm sure it's bad. I think that a lot of times there's a lot of trauma, both physical and emotional, that happen as a firefighter or first responder. And I honestly think that it should be similar to the military, where it's not a full life career, but a 20-year commitment or a 10-year commitment. And then there's some retirement benefits from that, because I don't think people can work these jobs that long without burning out and breaking. That I see the consequence of that all the time. And I just kind of want to bring that up. Nothing really actionable here, but I think it's something we should look into. We should have some way to make sure people aren't dying in these fields in any way. I just want to cover some data things really quickly. There is data looking at all of the surgeries that have happened for youth, for top surgery in particular, across the nation. They looked at 44 million people. They looked at the diagnostic criteria of surgeries for gender affirming care. And what they found is, over the 44 million people they looked at, there are only 4 youth in the nation who had gotten a top surgery to remove breast tissue. And of all of them that had happened, it was 160 or something like that. Most of them were for cisgender boys having autogynemastia, I think it's called. I don't know that offhand, but basically it's not happening. All that fear that all these kids were having these surgeries done, it was, one, happening, but not for trans kids, and two, it just wasn't happening. So all this scrutiny that was happening on trans care and the banning of it and the intense fear and moral panic was for nothing. As everyone in the medical field said constantly over and over again, it plays out in the data that we observe, and it makes sense. For the people who work in this care, we get it. Listen to us, please. Other data is, there's a resource guide for suicide prevention put up by Indie Hopes. I am a collaborator with this. I'm also a consultant for Indie Hopes. So I did help in crafting this a little bit, but it is a good look at all of the stuff you need to know if you are someone serving youth as a parent, a professional, or anything like that. I recommend checking it out. It's really good. I'm also including it in the State of the State report that I put together. Also, I did the State of the State report. I'm not going to talk about it. I'll talk about it in other places. So I did it. It's all the data and comprehensive outcomes on queer youth. And then finally, there's some food insecurity research that's really well done, showing that there are a lot of our youth and young adults who aren't doing well. There's families that aren't doing well. There are a lot of people who are making, let's say, enough money that they don't get benefits of food stamps or support like that, but they still don't have the money to afford what groceries are today. There's a lot of individuals that can be caught up in quite a lot of debt, where even though they are making significant money, they aren't getting ahead. So these are situations where our youth are still falling through the cracks, even though when we do have families that are more traditionally middle class, they are still struggling to feed their kids. And it's important when we have these conversations that all kids have the benefit of being fed and not necessarily worry about means testing that. That was what I have for our opening segment of the show. We'll be moving into the interview after this, and then I had a little bit of a shakeup because I was working on the State of the State report. That's live on my website for the data section, but I should be getting back to regular shows, and then you can find me every night on the Pulse. So that's what I got for you tonight. I hope you enjoy the interview. I thought it was really good, and I love the conversation that we had. So enjoy. Have a good night. Bye. All right, so it's Faye with Sunday Nights with Faye Seidler. I have a guest here to talk about a lot of the stuff that they do in their life and in their work. So if you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about your background, please do.
Sure. Yeah. I'm John David Berdahl. I'm an Aspie writer, artist, musician, difference maker, joy bringer, yay sayer, truth teller.
For folks who don't know, what does ASPE mean?
And so that's a sort of shortened version of a person or like Asperger's syndrome. And so people, there's like Aspergerian. Some people call themselves that. I had read Aspie, and so I just kind of latched onto that, or I attached to it. It's not really mentioned that much anymore, because in the DSM, what is it, 5 now? Are we on 5? Right. Yeah, so they just really removed that sort of diagnosis for a number of reasons, to simplify things. Also, Dr. Asperger had a connection to the Nazis and stuff
Mhm.
like that, but I still mention it just to transvaluate it,
Yeah.
and that it's to, bring up that it's a part of the history of this kind of condition, which is autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah. And I first talked to you at Anime Fargo. I was volunteering and you happened to show up and we just kind of got talking about, I don't know, autism in the modern world. So do you want to tell
Uh-huh.
me a little bit about kind of what your work looks like for that today?
Sure, yeah. Although what I recall that very differently,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
the conversation.
Well, it was about Minecraft and then it kind of
Yeah,
went places.
there we go. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it was Mario, where we were
yeah,
talking about Mario and how
yep.
Mario, right, has to be sort of done away with or something like that, or
So
how
I
we're.
was I was Bowsette in costume, and I had
Mhm.
a quest for people to make Mario needed to be defeated. So however people interpreted my quest, if they did
Uh-huh.
that, they got a special ribbon for it.
Okay.
That will happen next year too at Anime Fargo.
Oh,
I
nice.
don't know the dates offhand, but for people who want to go to the next Anime Fargo event, I will probably be there again. Bowsette will make her return, and Mario will suffer again.
So yeah, the first time we had met, we were just talking about suffering. And
Yeah.
then, we transitioned, or then we started talking about, the type of work that you do and the type of work that I do.
Yep.
And the type of work that I do, or I guess that I've really sort of, to say fallen into doing really isn't accurate. I have just maybe, golly, I'll think of an analogy, but it's really not something I aimed at doing, or it's not something that I had really been prepared to do or anticipated that I would be doing. I got a degree in art, okay, at MSUM, Minnesota State University, Moorhead, in 2012. Okay, so art degree, emphasis in drawing. But at that time, just a whole bunch of life events were occurring for me. And I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome or autism spectrum disorder at the age of 30. I'm 40 now.
Mhm.
And during that sort of process, or during that sort of, I guess, for me, like transformation, the whole world and sort of revelation too. And that's what some people talk about when they receive the correct diagnosis or a diagnosis at all. Things just start to make sense, or things start to fit, And so for me, like I just talked about this yesterday at MSUM, actually.
Yeah.
I was asked to present there, which was really, really awesome. And it went really well. And I was talking about how, I was originally diagnosed bipolar.
Mhm.
Okay. I was misdiagnosed first thing, and that's not uncommon.
Yep.
All right. And so I was bipolar, and then borderline personality disorder came up, and PTSD and OCD. And so I started reading and reading and reading, trying to find out, okay, what the heck is going on, inside of this noodle, you know, a lot of trial and error. Okay. And in doing so, I became a type of expert. I can just talk about this stuff being an Aspie, or being a person who, what has manifests autism the way that I do.
Yep.
I can talk and talk and talk about something, and also I don't know how to be nervous about things. I don't know how to be apprehensive. I don't know how to be embarrassed,
Yep.
so I'm kind of designed to be the perfect kind of teacher or educator, or presenter, because I will just go and go until people say, well, we have to be somewhere,
Yeah.
So that's how I don't know, I just kind of fell into a sort of groove, or meeting a need, really. If I have to say that, I started meeting a need because a lot of people had questions, and I just started answering them. And that's what I've been doing at colleges, for schools like Moorhead Area Public Schools, the police department here too, Moorhead PD, in their law enforcement center. And I talk with officers about symptoms of autism and sort of neurodivergent, sort of other neurodivergent conditions that can co-occur with autism.
Do you feel that people are undereducated in this topic?
Is this the funny portion of the? Thank you for that. I don't mean to laugh at that question, but it's like undereducated. Yeah. Yeah. People are severely, intensely undereducated, but not, I do believe, as far as I found out, by choice. And what I bring up when I present, or when I lecture or talk with groups, or with parents, grandparents, and professionals, it's that if you don't live it, you really don't have to know it. And there's a lot of that going on. A lot of people who are in these positions of, I guess, instruction or healing, they haven't really had to, they're not individuals who have the diagnosis themselves, and so some things are falling through the cracks or not getting imparted, and so that's why I guess I've been asked to do what I do, because I have the lived experience of it. Also, I can articulate it in a way that really benefits others, or informs others, or enlightens others.
I think there's a clear need for more education today for sure. But I
Mhm.
feel like, do you feel like we're way different than we were like even 10 years ago? Because I feel like it's so much more of the conversation, and even like the need that you see with people asking you to come in to like present. I feel like we are starting to become aware we should be educated in this topic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. A lot of places know they need to know more about neurodivergence, or neurodiversity, or being neuroatypical, or mental. It often gets talked about or mental illness. You'll see on the news, or it's just the kind of go-to thing. There must have been some sort of mental illness, or mental illness may have been a
Yeah.
cause. And not a lot of people are talking about mental wellness.
No, that's
Like
completely fair.
that's very rare to hear about just the phrase mental wellness.
Yeah.
And so I do embody that. I show up and be like, hey, we can laugh about this, and we can, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect, by no means. In fact, I make certain that I'm not, because I found out that's really being typical, is being imperfect,
Yeah.
and I present about that, I talk about that, definitely, but I show up and tell people, like, yeah, we can talk about this, and no, nothing's going to blow up, and this is a safe space, but also we can make jokes. Like I was at M State, or Minnesota State Community Technical College. They said, I'm going to begin with an autism joke. Okay, everybody. So an autistic person walks into a bar and then says, well, it was more like a dowel. And so the room was like, what? I didn't explain the joke then. Some people were like, that's good, but I think it can be really fun. We can talk about it like it's movies. We can talk about it like it's sports. We can talk about it like it's not as a big deal as the media makes it out to be. I don't know if it's like what mental health itself is a crisis. I think, to the point that you have been making, is that the lack of understanding and lack of knowledge is the crisis.
Your the trainings that you give are pretty accessible, right? Like if someone wanted to schedule a training with you, like they're listening to us right now and they're like, I want to bring this into my, classroom or my clinic or my organization. How do they talk to you? How do they get in touch with you? How do they do that?
Golly, so yeah, like email. That's often how it works. Some people just hear about me and they reach out to me on Facebook Messenger, email.
Sure.
I tell people, like, when I'm on the news, I'm going to be on the news tomorrow, providing an
Exciting.
on, and I say on the news, like, if you see me on the street, just stop me,
Yeah.
and I'll start presenting right there,
Street lecturing.
yeah, exactly. I'll lecture you right on the street, that sort of thing. But it's more, yeah, people, just the sort of, I guess, usual ways that
Yeah.
individuals do contact individuals. That's often how it happens.
You're going to be on the news, and I know it's going to be kind of about art and the stuff that you do with that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I just got done making a whole bunch of Jello. Here, I'll reach over. So I
Yeah.
was making some Jello, and I'm going to be providing an edible art project, sensory art project tomorrow on Valley News Live on their North Dakota Today. And so everything's going to be, there's going to be sort of gummy, there's jet puff marshmallow for snow, or thicker snow, and then there's whipped topping for thinner snow, and then the blue jello is going to be the ocean. It's going to be an Arctic scene, and
Yeah.
I've got some gummy creatures too. And so the entire thing, so you can set that up, for little learners,
Yeah.
who really enjoy touching things and squeezing things and making
Yeah.
messes and all that, and they can eat it. It's okay if they put it in their mouth,
Yep.
ingest it. It's safe.
Yeah. Well, kids are going to do that.
Well, yeah, that's what I found out teaching in the grade schools for Moorhead area public schools. I do
Yeah.
that in 5 grade schools.
One of the interesting things for me is you talk about kind of like being diagnosed 10 years ago and doing a lot of study and research for yourself to figure yourself out. And then fast forward 10 years and you're, doing a lot of talks on this. You're kind of like a local expert on it. I think
I've
that's
heard that
interesting because
Fargo
like,
famous. I've heard that
yeah,
I'm Fargo famous.
that's kind of like where I'm at because like
Well,
I did similar things for like trans issues back in the day where there was no education, no one was really doing that work, and I just kind of met the need because like much like you, I don't really have the same I'm not nervous to do things, so I will just throw myself into work and do it. Uh, so what I like you to talk about is like for when you're starting out, like I think your average person has like they never imagine they're going to be on the news talking about art. They don't imagine they're going to be lecturing in like big audiences at colleges or like
yeah.
nationally. So like what did those first conversations look like if you remember them? Like did you reach out to the news? Did they reach out to you? Like how did some of that stuff like start?
Sure. Yeah. How did it begin, or how did
Yeah.
I get in that groove? Maybe,
Hmm.
and that's what I'm thinking of. Like I was the needle or something, and I was set down on this record, and then all of a sudden, all this music started happening. That's what I mean by in the
That's
groove.
beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that's one of the examples of people saying like, you really know how to explain things so people understand it. It's like, and that's the gift that I've got, and that's me. What I found out, I don't have a sense of myself, or I don't have a sense of self the way that typical people do, for one reason and another. I mean, autism and life experiences too, or what I've gone through. But I really do know how to make something so just concrete, take something very abstract and make it concrete. I don't really know where I learned that.
Yeah.
I don't think it was one person. I think that's just me. And that's, I guess, how I've gotten to know myself. But how did I begin? So yeah, I was in college being diagnosed, with one thing and another, one diagnosis, one condition. Now I do say lifestyle. I say autism's a lifestyle more so than like a diagnosis, because I just ask people, do I seem like I'm sick? Like I don't think so. I think it's a perspective, definitely, you know, or a manner in which we can accomplish something. So yeah, I was for the news, that was me just promoting teaching for community education.
Sure.
And I was just offering classes, and I still do that. Moorhead Community Education. They have catalogs. I've got one right there. I said, hold it up. But
Yeah.
yeah. And afterwards, they had just said, wow, that was really great. You could come back, and offer like something. And so 70 times, 70, I suppose, shows later, it now has a name, like the segment. This is how you make it. And I show up just with stuff, and I show up as me, I guess, as this perspective that I've got, or this outlook. And I just engage the hosts, and I engage the viewers, and I just present and produce. I quote Jamie Lee Curtis with that one, like, I suit up, I show up, I say please and thank you, and I always bring cookies. you know, to make certain the job gets.
Solid. That is solid. That will get you so far.
And so that's how I got into that sort of gig, I suppose. Now, being the son of a celebrity, a regional celebrity, let me say that, to be clear. My dad still is. He and I have a podcast together on PBS called Davey B's Hit Song Vault. So his career hasn't ended. He's 80 years old, and he's an entertainer, broadcaster. And he had a band called Davy B and the Sonics in the 60s all the way up to, well, he started in 1950.
Wow.
No, he was 59, I think. He started in 1959, okay,
Yeah.
as a teenager. And all the way up until now, he's still, a broadcaster and type
Yeah.
of musician. And so I grew up with that just in the home. So it's like being in broadcast or on air sort of situations. That's not foreign to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, autism prevents me from, or I guess technically alexithymia that co-occurs with autism prevents me from really being unsettled or shy or something like that about being in front of cameras and
Yeah.
crowds. I just show up and I'm kind of like, where do I look? Just tell me where to look, and I'll look there.
Yeah.
And so that's really easy. So I do really well again because that was modeled for me how to behave around that
Mm-hmm.
because of my dad. And then presenting, golly, how did that, or gosh, or heck, shoot, gadzooks, egad. And I'm thinking of like every sort of synonym. That's me kind of perseverating there.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting into presenting, that was a little different. That was I started working as a personal care assistant,
Mm-hmm.
and so like social workers got to know me, working for Acra Home Care based out of Minnetonka,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm now a direct support professional too. So I work with younger individuals who have certain neurodivergent conditions as a, I suppose, type of mentor with them.
Yeah.
And so I guess conversations started getting around that type of, I guess, community here in town, because I was just getting to know them, like more nurses, again, social workers, or types of specialists, you know. And what was the first though? I did not commit it to memory. What was the first sort of presentation I offered? I think it was, anyway, I'm not going to
No, that's
fixate.
fine.
I'm not going to focus too much on like the exact first one, but how did it go? That was part of your question, right? How
Yeah.
did it go? The first, like getting into that. A lot of kind of shocked faces and not like disgusted, like what is going on here, but kind of like,
Yeah.
I had no idea. Like
Yeah.
I had no idea that that I was having the type of experience I was having being autistic, or identifying as autistic.
Yeah.
And that others were having perhaps a similar type of experience. And so a lot of people told me afterwards, you blew my mind. Like, I feel like, why didn't someone tell me that sooner? That was really, was it the same for you when you began sort of your type of work?
So for the work I did and the way I
No?
began, I was at the Pride Collective doing just kind of general education work. It was kind of really community oriented. It was opt-in. People could kind of come in from the street, get information. But the Rape and Abuse Crisis Center actually like came in and was like, we could use more education on this population. So they were like, who does that? And they asked around and they got back to me, and then I was invited to go in and present to the Rape and Abuse Crisis Center for like my first time. And I felt like I was young. I was like 25 or 26. I kind of felt like a kid basically because I was like, who am I like to be presenting to these professional adults in this important work? And so I went in there and I gave the presentation, and they were like extremely grateful for it. It was something they had no access to. It was really eye-opening for them, and kind of probably similar to you. It was I did the research. I broke down the ideas in ways that were digestible for people, and I presented it in just a really wholesome and friendly way. So they weren't like on guard. They weren't like they didn't have to feel bad about not knowing much about it because we just explored it together. And based on that training, like kind of like you talked about earlier, I didn't think I was going to be here today. Like, I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
think I was going to be doing this work. I didn't think I was going to be like the educator or the expert in it. Like, I never thought that when I started out 10 years ago, but I took that opportunity, and then word got around and they were like, oh, Faye came in and was really great. You should have her come into your organization. And then fast forward now, 10 years later, I've given like I don't know if I've given 1,000 trainings, but it's somewhere above 300 and below 1,000, somewhere in that
Let's just
range.
say 1,000. Let's just say
Yeah,
it.
let's just say 1,000. Let's just say it's been 1,000.
Let's
Like
be hyperbolic.
it's getting up there.
Yeah. Let's say 2,000, 10,000. Let's
No, no, that's a if that was one a day, that would be like 6 or 7 years. I don't think
good
I
for you.
couldn't have done that unless
Don't
I've been doing it literally every day.
Well, I
Um,
imagine, to say, have you actually done that? No. But like when some people present, they rehearse, right?
Yeah.
And they relive afterwards, just to know, or like think about, okay, what to bring up next time. And so perhaps in your own head, maybe you've done it 10,000 times,
I
you
will
know?
say that when I first did my very first training, like I
Mhm.
put probably like 50 hours into like a 1 or 2 hour training getting ready for it. And then I did like the dry presentation where I would be like, presenting to no one and but like pretending I had an audience. I did that like 3 to 4 times because I was just like, I need to make sure
Good
I
for
have
you.
this down. Like that's where I was when I started out. Now
Mhm.
I look at my calendar and if I have a training tomorrow, I'm like, all right, cool. I could walk into a place and give an adequate training with no preparation since I have thousands of hours of experience with it now, so
Sure.
I just can pull on that. So in my head, I would say you're accurate. Like I have
Oh, okay.
thought about this constantly all of the time for years. So yeah, I'm many
Hmm.
hours got devoted to it.
Yeah, probably. And are you in a gaming chair?
I mean, yes. Like it's hard to see with my camera on and off, but it's
Yeah,
like
but
the
I can see the
RX.
top of it. That's
Like
awesome.
okay, so it's not.
What?
Here's what I'm gonna say about it.
All right.
It's not technically a gamer chair. It is simply the chair every gamer uses.
Uh-huh.
But I will tell you,
Uh-huh.
this chair, it's called an RX Racer chair, I
Okay.
think. It is the best chair for ergonomics meet
Oh.
price. So like it kind of has this like, look to it and feel to it.
Uh-huh.
But if you want to get an ergonomic chair that will like be good for your back if you're in your computer for 10 plus hours a day like I am,
Oh.
like the
Okay.
office chairs that you'll see like bigwigs in and stuff, like those cost like $2,000. Like this chair costs like 150 or I don't know what it is. I got this like 4 years ago, but like
Oh.
it is like the cheapest chair for the best ergonomic support. So,
Okay.
but you are correct
Sure.
ultimately.
Sure. And that's great that, yeah, it's a gaming chair, but I also need it for this and this.
So we've
Start.
talked about like the getting started with the training. One
Yeah.
thing I want to kind of touch in, just for like wrapping up the interview is, we've talked around the identity, right? About neurodivergency, ASPE, being autistic, but
Yeah.
let's spend some time actually talking about what that is like, kind of like when you're, during your trainings, because one of the ways I like connected when we first met and talked to is I talked about my own experiences and it wasn't until the pandemic that, we were all kind of locked inside and kind of talking about stuff in a real way that we didn't before,
Yeah.
that I really started to explore myself, like what it meant to be neurodivergent. And kind of like what you said about your trainings when you talk to people about how you could have these different experiences. Like I was reading folks who identified as neurodivergent or autistic, and I was reading how they would say their minds worked, and I would be
Ooh.
like, "Oh, that's how my mind works," and then I would be like, "Wait a minute, that probably means something."
Uh-huh.
Uh, so I guess if you were to like be just talking to a general audience and the people listening right now, like, what does that feel like, or what are some like ways that it is to be neurodivergent, or ways brains can be different?
Sure. Sure. And thank you for that question. I got asked that yesterday. And I do get asked that once in a while. And I started working on a documentary to
Oh,
answer that
fun.
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's called I'll Start From Here. And you can find the trailer for it.
Great name.
Oh yeah.
Great name. I just got to
Oh yeah.
put that out there right now.
Yeah. One person was like, no, that's not supposed to be the name. And I was like, okay, you don't get to work on this anymore.
Oh,
And I don't know if that's being blunt or whatever. It's just kind of like, no, no, this is what it needs to be. And so
yeah.
this is what it's going to be. And you no longer, your input's no longer necessary.
Yeah.
So go work on your own film, go do your own thing. I'm going to do this.
Yep.
Yeah. And so many conversations that I've had, like so many people talking about, like, I suppose professionally and personally, people talking about the trauma that they've been through or
Yeah.
the trials and tribulations and troubles and all of that. And they'll say, like, so after everything, this is the type of person I was going to be,
Yeah.
you know? And and one person had said, I'll start from here. With everything that's happened, I'll start from here. And it's like, oh, that has to be the name of the film.
It is so good.
Yeah. And so, and I was being interviewed on Valley News Live about the documentary, and they asked the Jessie Ahmed was her name, the host of the sort of Valley News Now, it was
Mhm.
called. And she had said, well, what was your I'll start from here moment? And I'd been working on the film for like a year, and it didn't occur to me to ask that question of like people I've been interviewing,
Yeah.
because I just show the kind of work I do, or I guess the kind of, I don't know, practice that I've got is whatever's supposed to come up will come up.
Yeah.
It doesn't really need me forcing it, and it doesn't really need me poking and prodding and whatnot. I ought not to do that. It's just whatever comes to the surface is what comes to the surface, and then that's what we'll, work with. So what is it like for me though? Get back to your question. Let me get back to your question. What is it like for me to be autistic? So yeah, I started working on a documentary about that to answer the question. Also started working on a memoir to answer that question. That one's called Talking About Myself.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of like people are like, stop being, whatever. It's like, well, how do I learn about myself unless I talk about myself or examine myself, And so, yeah, I had to develop theory of mind, called, to even begin to answer that question. All right. To understand that there are different types of minds. Like for me, I just went through the world, and most humans do, thinking we all have the same type of mind. We all have the same type of life, and experiences or whatnot, or I don't know, events. Once I started learning about how different I was concerning life events that had happened that set me on that path, a band member took his own life
Oh no.
in a band that I was in. And everyone around was grieving. But for me, I was just kind of like, are we supposed to get back to work? And I really started to notice how different I was. I mean, I've heard about it. Like people would say, well, you're so smart. Why is it you're so smart, but you don't understand this or don't understand that, or I got called retarded or dumb or in certain areas, and at certain times. And so I was supposed to really get to the answer to the question, to the point. Okay. So what is autism like for me? Most of all of this around me is just ones and zeros.
Yeah.
It's just information. If I have to say I'm like a computer, sure, okay. But I don't really know how to feel about anything intrinsically, ever.
Yeah.
I don't know how to be excited. I don't know how to be melancholy. I don't know how to be anxious, internally. And so in that way, I also don't know how to be tired. I don't know how to be like hungry. And I'm talking about interoception there. Okay. Like those signals that get sent to let you know you ought to eat, that you ought to sleep, It's not like I don't have those, but they're significantly slowed, for me. But because of the work that I've done in learning about how different I am, I live a pretty typical, whatever, if we need to say normative, regular sort of life, because I know that some things ought to happen at certain times, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like eating your vegetables, like, socializing in a certain way, or making certain that you listen, or communicate, that you communicate in a certain way. So a lot of people will tell me I don't look autistic, because I'm a level 1 autistic individual. A level 3 autistic diagnosis looks very different from me. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so that's one of the things I talk about, like how different it looks for each person and how different it ought to look for each person. And most people think that autism looks like a preteen Caucasian male in the back of a classroom, flapping and rocking, and making or communicating in an alternate or alternative way, with just sounds, and not really grammar, so to speak, or the type of speaking, or vocalizations that most people do offer, or do. So is that answering your question? And so for me, autism is very much like living in a dream. Okay. It's called unreality and sort of mind blindness, that for a long time, it didn't seem like there were consequences, either positive or negative, and since I don't know how to feel about certain things, I also didn't know how to hurt about certain things. So I learned lessons very differently, especially like physically, like people just slapping me in the face, and I could just be like, sure, it's like, and it wouldn't register. And that would sort of scare people or something like that. But, now, it doesn't really happen that often. Although what I do bring up is I was on a date, and this inebriated individual walked up to me and said, "You better be taking this date home with you." And I was like, well, "No, you're not supposed to do that on the first." And he winds up and he slaps me as hard as he can.
What in the world?
And because he's drunk, And so I got slapped, so something hit me, so I'm going to do that. But then I just looked right back at him. I was like, "Don't do that again." And he was like, "I won't." Because it's like I didn't know how to experience. I still don't know how to experience physical pain and emotional pain.
Yeah.
And I had a different form of kind of initiative, and I was mirroring a lot, not really masking, because and I talk about the difference between those two. Mirroring, I was just getting through or getting by. So a lot of that is really kind of involuntary mirroring. You
Yeah.
just get to the next kind of step, and you're not really like masking. I wasn't hiding or camouflaging anything. So I didn't get made fun of or excluded. So hopefully that's helping. It's really complex
I
to have.
think that earlier in your explanation, just kind of realizing that you are processing the world in a different way and that
Mhm.
people's brains are not one story and that they all of us are very nuanced in different ways and we have a whole amalgamation of experiences and all of that. What helped me to kind of start to see myself within like the neurodivergency, like we started to realize that not even just with like neurodivergency, like it's been kind of going around online that like some people don't think with an internal narrative. They don't have like words that they think in their head.
Mhm.
Instead, they tend to have like more like images or they might have more like kind of non-verbal or imaging processing that's a little bit different. Like, and I think that kind of like what you said, we kind of go into the world thinking that people probably are about like us. Um, and then it feels really weird when it's just like, how come everyone else is different? Um, and then trying to like figure out
Under,
what's going on with that.
uh-huh.
And it's so weird because how pervasive it is across all of our ways of communicating and relating. Because I think when people try to think about like either autism or neurodivergency, it's like mentioning that kid in the back of the classroom, that type 3 who is really
Mhm.
having struggles with that. But it's just like one of the things that I think about and kind of that got me on some of this pathway to think about myself was anytime someone tried to tell me about problems going on in their life, my natural inclination would be like, okay, well, here's how that's similar to a problem I've experienced, and that's how I was trying to relate to them. But what I understood was for neurotypical individuals, if you try to bring it yourself into that conversation to relate, their reaction is, you're making this about you, it should be about me. And
Oh,
what
whoa.
would end up happening is they would get very upset at me and I'd be like, well, I'm trying to let you know why I understand. um, and that was like my entire childhood, it was kind of like trying to relate to people in a way they didn't want to relate to me and didn't understand. And like it wasn't until I was an adult and could process this and could like go back and realize, oh, we were just always miscommunicating the entire time. So for me, that communication standpoint was probably like the thing that got me into thinking about it and just thinking
Uh-huh.
about how different and diverse like our perspectives can be and how we are experiencing basically different realities even though we are kind of sharing the same space.
Huh. Different realities. Nice. Yeah, you are hitting the nail on the head with a lot of, what you brought up. And or you are absolutely correct or
Yeah.
accurate in what you have talked about. And yeah, and because it's so different for every individual, because every individual is so different, I tell people there's a billion ways to do things
Yep.
because there's billions of us,
Mhm.
there's billions and billions of ways to do things. And yeah, our brains attempt to code things so that we can understand them better, or information. Our brains attempt to see patterns where there are none so that we can succeed. Our brains work very, very hard just to try and make sense of all this, without any type of perhaps diagnosis.
Yep.
you know and then you add on top of that, yeah, it interprets sensory input in a non-normative, or as we've been talking about, divergent sort of manner, or atypical sort of way, whether that be, yeah, through pictures or concretely, it has to be concrete, or in a literal sort of manner, or we haven't even talked about, we were wrapping this up, right? I mean, it's like, we haven't even brought up like synesthesia. We haven't brought up, so many different ways of experiencing all of this. And so I was teaching adults with disabilities class from Moorhead Community Education. And this isn't the first time, but it was the first time for that class that I was teaching an individual who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And autism began as a childhood form of schizophrenia. And then it became its own diagnosis later on. And so I sat with this individual, and we talked about the similarities between our conditions. And it was in that sort of moment, or is at that time, where I chose, I guess, intentionally, deliberately, to not disagree with people when they are having a different sensory experience than I am. I'm not going to sit there, especially with someone who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, who sees things that I cannot see
Yeah.
on at times, and hears things that I cannot hear. You know, for if we need to say that's hallucinating, we can't. You know, that's technically what's going on. But you know, I'm not just going to say, hey, that makes you wrong, that makes you bad. No, you're here. Okay, you're here, and we are together, and we ought to, as a group, as a community, whatever, as you know, this kind of, I was about to say tribe, you know, but this collection of people, you know, we need to work with who's around us in the best, most polite, most, you know, healthy way possible. So I chose, like, if I can't see what that person's seeing, I'm not going to put this person down. I'm just going to let that person know I can't see what you're seeing, you know, and I take that now into kind of every conversation I have, every situation I have, you know, or every situation that I guess I'm in the middle of or a part of, where it's kind of like someone is it must have a different experience than I have, you know, and that when we do come together and do communicate and do share, then the picture becomes clearer, or the, I don't know, goal becomes much more attainable, you know. And so that's all that I try and do with the work that I do, is the most good right now with the people around me. Okay. And hopefully that happens.
I guess one last question. I think I focused on this a little bit more with, like, you know, professionals, or, you know, higher concept, you know, what this can be. But for people who are listening, like, right now, or watching this right now, and they're like, I kind of am I on the spectrum somewhere? Am I neurodiverse? What would you tell them? Like, if they are right now questioning that, what would you tell them? What should they do?
Sure. Oh, you need me to shut on them? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, well, you know, just like, if they want to explore this more,
Uh-huh.
or, you know, what's like a good next step now that they're starting to question this?
Yeah. Yeah. So if they're wondering about that, watch out for some professionals. Well, first, finding individuals that you can talk to about this. You know, first thing, oh, I just talked about self-diagnosis yesterday. I am not going to put anyone down for beginning to self-diagnose, you know, because that's how the journey begins for a lot of people. But just don't isolate. Okay. Don't isolate, integrate. Don't isolate, integrate. Make certain that you're not just watching that person on TikTok and
Yep.
only that person on TikTok. Okay. Not only just listening to me in this sort of, you know, Brian, thank you so much for allowing me to join you, you know, but in this type of recording, or in this, like, during this conversation, like, don't just rely on me. Talk to others, you know, who have been diagnosed, or who live this lifestyle, you know, and find out the reality of it, you know, and not just what is glamorous, or what is cool, or trendy, or popular, you know. So be careful self-diagnosing. I'd say that, you know, and don't isolate, integrate, you know. And yeah, golly, you know. And so, like, the first steps, that those are like primary. But if you're wondering about it, you know, and then finding professionals that you can talk to, you know, it's like, make certain that there's rapport, you know, or that you can talk to someone, and make certain that there's competence, you know. And it's not like, I'm not saying you have to test doctors all the
Yeah,
time. It's
yeah,
just kind of like, and I imagine both of us could tell stories about people who are supposed to be professionals and supposed to be experts, and you get into a conversation with them, or a discussion, and about 2 minutes in, is like, you have no idea what you're talking about, you know. You
yeah,
you know, and if you point it out, which I do point that sort of thing out, where it's kind of like, no, that's not what that is, you know. I'll do that sort of thing. And some professionals will get really mad, and they'll try and make it your fault, or there's
yeah,
blame, guilt and shame because of it, or because they're being put on the spot, or they're being kind of called out,
yeah,
you know. And it's like, I choose to do that because I don't know how to feel scared about
yeah,
doing it. So there ought to be a sort of checks and balances. But just be careful. Okay, just because a person's a doctor doesn't mean you have to do everything that person says. Okay,
mhm,
you can say no. Okay, you can't say, no, I don't want to take that medication. No, I don't want to, undergo this type of therapy. All right. And no is a complete answer. You don't have to explain, Now, if we get into a sort of gray area when it's kind of like, if you're not functioning the way you think you ought to, or accomplishing things the way that you think you ought to, and a professional is trying to, but if it's just yucky, get away from it. That's my point. You'll meet some professionals who will challenge you, and maybe indulge that to a certain degree,
Yep.
as you're beginning this, but if it's just yuck, get away, and trust your gut with that one. So yeah, that's sort of what I have to say about, beginning the journey. It's like, talk to people who live it, talk to experts that you can trust, who are competent and that, I don't know, treat you fairly. And then make certain to, I don't know, catch yourself up on kind of what's kind of been explored and explained about that type of subject. Well, if it needs to be YouTube, okay. If it needs to be Facebook, all right. If it needs to be social media, if that's your way in, sure. Or if it needs to be podcasts or something like that. But yeah, probably read some scholarly sort of works a little bit, and yeah, find out what really applies to you, and just make it your own, or find your own way, which can be difficult when you don't have a sense of self, as I do. Like, it wasn't messy for me, and it wasn't totally complicated, but it took a while to sort through a lot of these diagnoses that I was getting. Again, like bipolar, and then I was medicated, and borderline personality, and PTSD, and then I met a childhood autism specialist, or a child autism specialist, and then she referred me to an adult autism specialist, and then I got the formal diagnosis, and things have been pretty, I don't know about easygoing, but pretty clear, and
Makes
pretty
sense.
pretty even, pretty balanced for me.
To plug my own work, the LGBTQ plus directory that I maintain, I ask a question on there specifically if the provider feels like they're confident. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the best, but feels like they are confident or comfortable with individuals who are either neurodiverse or autistic. So I try to make sure that people, have some experience with patients like that, so you don't have to like get into a doctor who really doesn't know what they're talking about or doesn't have much experience, but it will direct people to hopefully a higher bar of provider that they can feel safer with. And those are primary doctors, there's a therapist and things like that. And I'll say for me, like, what I try to encourage people within, like, let's say gender identity for trans individuals or sexual orientation for like gay or bi individuals is I try to say don't focus on like the label that much. Like, you don't have to hit that box, right? You just have to explore what makes you feel comfortable, and what makes sense for explaining yourself to others in a way that rhymes with you, because we're never going to be perfect matches. And I think for me, the thing that really let me be comfortable, like identifying as neurodiverse, is that, like, I just know when I'm talking to people who are self-identify as neurodiverse or autistic or things like that, it feels more comfortable. Like, I feel like I'm able to talk in a way where I'm not translating my thoughts into this like holistic or no, or like neurotypical way. I can just
I
like
think you're
be
saying a list.
myself and breathe in a way that like I can't explain except for just how it feels. It just feels easier to talk to people who are neurodivergent. So I really
Sure.
like your advice about finding other people. Just like explore it with other people. Don't just like look online. Don't just look on TikTok. Actually just get out there in the community and like make friends, like have connections and use
Yeah.
them to help understand yourself.
Yes. And I was talking with a specialist, and I ought to say too, it's like, yeah, look for rapport and competence, but then find people, especially professionals, who presume competence
Yep.
and provide agency, that don't, you're going to run into perhaps moments of ableism, and that's another perhaps hour long, two
Yep.
hour long conversation we can have about that one, but that's a form of discrimination. And it happens in family, it happens everywhere, for individuals with disabilities. And I'm not saying that it's pervasive, that's the word,
Mhm.
or it's pretty common and people don't even realize they're doing it, because they'll say like, well, that seems hard for you. You know what? I'll do it. That's a form of it where it's like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
let that person do that, So find people who will let you do what you think you're supposed to, like just open a door, go up steps, read a book, listen to music, talk about a certain subject without being like, that seems tough for you. You know what? I'll explain it. And you
Oh
can
no.
like, no, we're like, get away from that person immediately. Again, that's another yuck moment. But I was talking with a professional who had said, everybody's a little bit autistic.
Yep.
And I had said, well, that's kind of like saying every woman's slightly pregnant.
Yeah.
you know it's like you kind of are or you aren't,
Yep.
because if everyone was slightly autistic, it wouldn't be considered a divergence.
Yeah.
So or a neurodivergence. And
Yeah.
so I had said, and I thought about it. I didn't judge that. I don't know how to judge intrinsically or innately or whatever. It's like, I don't know how to be like yuck and yum, but that's why I encourage people, if you can feel it, trust it, or if you're experiencing that. So I thought about it while this individual was talking a bit more, and I said, you know what? Everyone's got a condition. It's called the human condition,
Yep.
and some of us are more human than others. So
It feels like a movie moment almost, like the dramatic endpoint of like a movie argument.
oh yeah, and then I don't know, not credits roll, but maybe
Yeah.
montage of another character thinking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
walking along with hands in pockets, like, yeah, I
Well,
got,
I
I got.
appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate that we have gotten so much further in culture to understand how we can all be different. And I'm glad that we've gotten to a point where we can give agency to people who are different and that we can like celebrate difference instead of trying to like fit everyone into a single mold. So I like where we are. Well, I mean, I like where we're getting to. I like that we're progressing on these things.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I appreciate your work to open up that space for people and to let them to get some education on the ways that we can be different and the ways that we can still come together. So thank you
Mhm.
so much for joining me. Thank you like for going through a lot of the work that you do. And yeah, unless you have anything else, that's what I got for our talk today.
No, no, there's really nothing else. I mean, yeah, there's so many more subjects
Yep.
related to, or I mean, topics related to this type of subject, but it's like, oh no, I think we had a really great, sort of, I don't know, chit chat
Yep.
about some of what we're both doing, and that's really neat. And I think we ought to just thank our community too, because it's not just us,
Oh yeah,
and some
absolutely.
people some people think that they're rock stars or something like that. I just got done working at Eventide Senior Living Community, or Eventide on 8th, which is part of Eventide Senior Living Communities,
Yeah.
and in Moorhead. I point because that's where it is for where I'm sitting now. It's like over there,
Yeah.
over there. So yeah, and so I was finishing up there, and they had said, "Thank you for being awesome," and I said, "Thank you for allowing me
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be." Okay, it's not just me doing that; it's others. Yes, to come perhaps full circle, reaching out to me and reaching out to you, sending emails saying, "Hey, can you come in?" Those are the people that we ought to thank the most, because it's like, yeah, exactly. At first, I thought you were doing the money sort of thing.
No,
I was
no,
like,
no, no,
okay,
no.
yeah, money's good too, but
No, no.
sort of thing. But maybe so yeah, applaud. But yeah, it's those people who see the need, and take action. Those people are really great, and they're really awesome. And to see our potential and to see how change can happen, and that's true courage, And then to make certain we get paid for it too.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
talk
So
about
getting
get
back into that.
earn a living and not
Yeah.
just take advantage of us,
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about, like with rapport and competence and, providing agency. It's kind of like, you know what? You're doing so much good and you ought to be compensated for it. So yeah, there's a lot of good in this world, and there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of trust. And it's just been sitting and waiting. And I think it's really going to blossom and bloom in a way that you or I hadn't really imagined, And
Yeah.
if we're seeds for that, that's really, really great. Thing is, what is it? Isn't there like a quote or something like that, or some sort of statement where it's like, for the flower to succeed, the seed has to like die
Yeah.
or something like that, or be destroyed. So be it, I
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
So be it. So there you go.
Well, I think that's beautiful. I love the reflection for community. I always try to make that part of my work is we're nothing without the community. Like we're just two people. Like we're not, that's not a society.
Oh,
So thank you for bringing that into the space. And thank you for talking to me today. Well, thank you everyone for watching my show. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a good rest of your week. I hope we see you back here next week. Just want to give some thank yous to all the folks here who contributed to the show, who made it all a great time and informed us about the cool stuff they're doing. He will be my outro probably for a while until I choose to change it. You all have a good day. Bye.